Curtain going up. Curtain going up. Places, please. Overture, stand by.
Ladies and gentlemen, she comes to you from the cornfields of Indiana. She loves the Constitution more than she likes most people. Allow me to introduce Shouse in the House.
Hello, everybody. This is Jay. Super excited to have him on. He is Armed Bear Caucus on Twitter. And I'm going to get right into it, Jay. I'm going to completely throw you off guard. I know I sent you kind of an idea of what I wanted to discuss today, but I read through some of the stuff that you have published online. And one of the things that's a very hot button topic right now that you have written about extensively is immigration. And I want to kind of throw you off just a little bit, but I want to talk about that because we've got right now they're getting ready to bring all of these Afghan refugees over and bring them into Texas. That in addition to what's already crossing over the border right now from Mexico. So I want to kind of talk to you a little bit because I am a constitutionalist, right? So there's nothing that says that we should be preventing anybody from coming in the country as far as the actual Constitution is written. Now, there are some laws.
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
And I think that people get hung up, and even I personally get hung up, being a liberty-minded individual with the concept of immigration. I'm fine, bring everybody in here. But my problem is where the social welfare programs are still in place when that process takes place, right? So talk to me a little bit about that, and because it seems to be an issue for you too. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
This is one of the areas where I part ways with a lot of my Mises buddies, and I have a lot of them. One of the reasons I am the Armed Bear Caucus is my wife and I just got irritated with all the different caucuses sniping at each other, and I said, well, I'm making my own. So this is where I'm coming from, is kind of an indie viewpoint, if you will. If I had to philosophically define it, we probably are more radical, if that means anything to people.
Right.
The inside baseball term. But to your question, you are absolutely correct. And I like to point this out to people all the time. Traditionally, constitutional conservatives. And I say, point to the part of the Constitution that permits the federal government from regulating or to regulate immigration. Well, it's right there, they say. And I'm like, that says naturalization.
Right.
That has to do with citizen and non-citizen, citizen versus legal resident. I've had so many crazy responses to that question, including one constitutional scholar, conservative gentleman, telling me Article 1, Section 9 permitted it, which is importation of certain persons, aka slaves. And right. I didn't know how to do with that, other than just kind of block that person from my life forever. So on the one hand, there is the philosophical underpinning, and the Libertarian Party platform, for instance, talks about freedom of migration in like two places, I think. One of which, though, the main one is the economic section. Economic freedom, and requires you to be able to move somewhere for a job. And as libertarians, we generally don't respect arbitrary borders. And I know the party platform says, the government should not unreasonably constrain people from crossing a border. And I think that was kind of a truce sign between factions on the platform. But I know people generally fall into a couple camps. Yes, let everybody in. Or no, only let people who follow the rules. Or like you said, a lot of people will say, but we have a welfare state. Right. We can't afford it. And I have a couple of counterpoints to that, I guess. One, it doesn't matter if you're going to hew to a constitutional, constitutional fealty, you're going to say, I'm sorry, if anybody's going to restrict immigration from Mexico, it has to be the state of Texas.
Right.
And they have to decide But then that leaves me in Oklahoma wondering, well, I want to hire this guy, and he's coming from the South. Texas, do they have a right to stop me from bringing that person in,
Right.
from a commercial flight or something? All these things. So as far as you catching me off guard,
I know.
I
I'm sorry.
usually talk about this in terms of, I usually attack this in terms of, well, it's not constitutional.
Right.
And if you say, but it's okay because, you're also inadvertently saying, gun control is okay in certain circumstances. The federal government can do these things if there's a some other reason that they need to do it, or some other need that they seem to be feeling. So I reject it philosophically from that perspective. And as to the welfare state part, what are we going to do? Are we never going to, this is the pragmatic attack I would take. Are we never going to reduce any government until you can't reduce all of it at the same time. We're not going to eliminate the welfare state. We have, in my opinion, we have way more better shot at reducing and streamlining the immigration system. And I mean, pragmatically, I know we're not going to go open borders.
Right.
I know we're never going to, probably in my life, get back to 1835.
Yeah.
Guy wanders in from Canada and starts sets up shop.
Yeah.
Which was, interestingly, the first 100 years of a republic, they didn't care.
Right.
Which, by the way, destroys the argument of, well, how can you have a country without any borders? Like, well, the U.S. had borders for 100 years and didn't control them, really.
Right.
So, I mean, what are you saying? So back to the welfare state being this monstrous thing that's grown since, the progressive era. We're going on 100 years of stacking on program after program. How are we going to even ever? You're basically saying we're never going to reform immigration because you're predicating it on, this dependency of, well, let's reduce the welfare state first. The other point I would probably make is, how do you know that legal immigrants are going to eat up all the welfare?
Right.
In my mind, if you pragmatically, again, went back to say an Ellis, I always try to sell people. I'm like, hey, man, I know this is what the Constitution says. Can I sell you on an Ellis Island, a 21st century approach to Ellis Island? I can buy a gun and get a background check done in 5 minutes. I can. If 5 minutes is an okay enough background check for me to purchase a firearm,
right?
Why can't some guy, go online to the U.S. consulate in Mexico City, get a work visa? Mexico's cooperative. They say, yeah, as far as we know, this guy's not a felon or whatever, and then just come on in. And why should there be limits on how many times that person goes back and forth? It's ironically our restrictions that make people overstay their visas because it's too hard to get them renewed a lot of times.
The process over again. Yeah.
In my view, if we just roll it back, a lot of these arbitrary restrictions, roll it way back, get an Ellis Island-ish style approach going. Hey, welfare people who don't want the welfare state to collapse, or maybe think it's a bad idea. Where do you think the illegal immigrants are paying their taxes? They're not paying income taxes. They're not paying into Social Security. They're paying local sales taxes, right? So it's not like they're not paying taxes, but they are paying local, state, and sales taxes. If you get them legal and you say, hey, you can come and go, we don't care. Just here's your immigrant number, and it feeds into the system. So pragmatically speaking, I think you'll actually get. I would assume that it would be a wash, and I'll find studies. We can all go out and find a million studies about what might happen from Cato or Mises.org or any number of different viewpoints on this. I just, at the end of the day, I can't justify saying you can't make open borders. And when I say, but nobody's trying to really just knock down all the gates and just tumbleweeds, and Al-Qaeda guy with an RPG on his back is just watering over from El Paso or something.
Right.
That's not what anybody's actually talking about.
No.
None of this. Number two, hey, how about we end the war on drugs?
Yeah, no kidding.
That might help. But I mean, if we're worried about, prohibition breeds black markets. We all, as libertarians, know this is true every single
Right.
time. So let's lessen the prohibitions. Let's start ratcheting it back the other way and see where we are. That's all I really ever want.
Yeah.
And I think that's all politically a libertarian can hope for, is to say, hey, can we just knock off this crazy system? I mean, once upon a time, somebody made a kind of a humorous flowchart, how to become a citizen. It is like a game of mousetrap, right? If you remember the old, it's just this crazy Rube Goldberg looking thing where, you apply, 6-7 years later. One of our good friends in the neighborhood, she was brought into this country. She married an American. She's from the Philippines via, the UK, oddly enough. Skilled nurse, the whole thing. She had to work for years to get her citizenship. And it shouldn't take that long.
It shouldn't be that hard.
And never mind, and I'm not even asking that the citizenship be that role. Let's get green cards to people. Let's get worker visas to people who want them. And let's stop telling employers, economically speaking, I shouldn't have to hire a certain group because the state tells me to.
Right.
I shouldn't have to prefer one group over another. And to be honest, people who are against, the South Park, they took our jobs argument, right? JAWBS.
It's one of my favorite episodes.
Do you really want to pay 3 times as much for tomatoes? Because you will.
Yeah.
I'm not making this up. So I don't know if I've answered your question fully or exactly. This is just off the top of my head, a couple things I rant about sometimes.
I just, with that being such a hot button issue and you having written about it, I wanted to just touch on it while I had you on here.
And if I'm going to jab at my Mises bros, I think it's interesting, and this is more Twitter than anything else, but I my paw scratches my head when I see Twitter ANCAPs railing about we can't bring in immigrants until the welfare state's gone. And I'm like, you're an ANCAP. Why? What? Why are you arguing this point? You should be arguing why am I arguing the point you should be arguing is what I'm saying, I guess.
Yeah. So what brought you and I together is Joel with our Libertas instruction.
Yeah.
So
that crazy kid.
Yeah. So I want to touch on guns real fast just because, and I know that wasn't on the list either, but
no, that's fine. I'm
the
Armed Bear,
legislation that just passed where we're not doing Russian imports now on ammunition. How do you think that's going to go?
Well, what it seems to be doing is the prices are going up and the supply is vanishing of like Wolf and Tula ammo. Clearly, it's
you think Wolf and Tula
stupid.
will leave and go to manufacture in a different country?
I've heard Tula's already moving an operation to China.
Really?
And I want to say some Wolf is actually manufactured out of Taiwan. So I don't know. It's going to affect the supply. People are going to panic.
Short term for a while, yeah.
And then, I'm not going to be able to get steel case for anything I may or may not have in the closet.
I mean, I thought maybe they'd go to Germany, or I didn't expect China. So that's
part of the problem is if they manufacture in Germany, that's going to raise the price right there. And it just goes back to illustrate the problem. This isn't like a law they passed. This is just what the Attorney General is saying, nah.
Yeah.
Or the president.
Well, okay. So let's talk about that, right? Let's really talk about what this is, right? So they know they can't pass the gun reform that they want to. Mm-hmm. They know that they can't get away with it. So do you really think, I'm sorry, but I can't imagine that Joe Biden really gives a shit who Vladimir Putin poisons. I can't imagine that there aren't a lot of people that he has poisoned.
Come on, man. That was 4 or 5 days ago.
Holy shit, man.
Sorry, it's okay.
Oh, it's so true too. But that's my point. Like he doesn't care. This is being used to actually put their thumb down on the gun industry and gun owners in the United
States. To me,
States.
this is another brick in the wall, man. This is when federal law purports to give the administration, the attorney general, the president as chief trade officer, whatever, the ability to just basically say, this is not suitable. Or, I mean, the sporting purposes thing, like, oh, well, that rifle doesn't look very sporting. I'm not going to allow it to be imported.
Right.
Because reasons. It's like,
yeah.
So particularly Russian ammo, as some sort of trade embargo, it only hurts the Americans. It's like the Chinese steel tariff or any of that other garbage that Trump did,
right?
Which was, well, hey, this tiny group of people says it's cool. But in this case, there's not even a group of people here in America that wants it. It's not like, I mean, unless you're talking about Remington or somebody who's suddenly going to corner the market on 7.62x39, which I don't see happening.
Right.
I mean, we just don't make it cheap enough. And to be honest, there's something special about that steel case out of a commie gun.
Yeah.
As a je ne sais quoi.
I got a little boy that is one of my followers. He just bought his rifle and now he's not going to be able to buy any ammunition for it. He's so mad. Like, oh God, he's so mad. He's not happy. So I wanted to touch on that. What do you think about the Chipman nomination? You think that's going to go through?
Boy, he's gotten a lot more heat than I thought that they would listen to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been relentless and great because he's just horrible. If he didn't get approved, it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Yeah.
But I honestly don't know because this administration is particularly tone deaf in this area. So
well, and I feel like the uniparty has become particularly tone deaf to the people too. Like this infrastructure bill that just passed. I don't know a single person that's read that legislation and said, man, I really want to give $3.1 trillion to a bunch of your family and friends that you're going to write these contracts to.
Let me fix that for you. I don't know one person who's read the legislation.
Oh, I did. I read the bill.
I mean, cover to cover.
Yes.
It's one of those.
I skipped like, the legalese kind of stuff, but I read the entire bill. It is fucking garbage.
I can imagine.
There's another guy, Oilfield Rando. I don't know if you follow him or not, but he reads all of the legislation and then writes like articles about what the bill is. But nobody that's voting for it read it.
Nope. Oh, Thomas Massey, who's always a fun follow, even though he's a Republican. He's always going on about that. Hey, could we have more than 24 hours to look at these 2,000 pages of garbage you just dumped on our desk?
Right.
And they do that on purpose. So, it's all.
Well, it's just fun to see. Well, I just always sit there and I wonder, like, that the legislators didn't read this, the people who are actually passing the laws. It's the people behind the scenes, right? The lobbyists, the attorneys. That's who's writing this garbage. And it's like.
And then it's House leadership, Senate leadership, and it's a small cabal of, figureheads and their staff.
Right.
And they're probably working hand in hand with, if you really want to know what the deep state is, I try to explain to people, there is a group of unelected middle managers, we'll call them, on the executive branch that never leave. Right. They don't care what administration's in place. The administrations change every 4 years or 8 years or whatever. And that group of what I call middle managers, that's the layer between the vast majority of the federal workers, workforce and the appointees. So the appointees
Right.
change with the administration, but there's this chunk in the middle, that if you're familiar with the terminology, the SES layer
Right.
executives,
Yeah.
and
They don't
it's
change.
those people on one end, and like you said, the legislative. I don't know. There's some group of gray men and women. We'll just be
Yeah.
fair, men and women who are gray, running around in the Capitol just feeding stuff. Do you remember I just randomly was thinking of when Robert Byrd was still in the Senate, and it was basically Weekend at Bernie's,
Right.
and like he had as a guy leading him around, leading him to the
Right.
podium, leading him to his desk, sign this, Mr.
Like
Senator.
Joe
and you're
Biden's
going,
Secret Service. Yeah.
I'm not sure Pelosi's not in that category pretty soon.
This is her vodka supplier. No, I'm sorry. That was mean. Okay, so let's talk education system, right? So I feel like that was originally what you and I had talked about discussing.
Yeah.
The lack of good literature that people acquaint themselves with, right? So if I were to go ask, the people that I'm friends with in my day-to-day life, hey, have you read Rothbard's Anatomy of the State? They'd be like, what are you talking about? Like
Right.
Like these are not required reading materials in school. I remember Howard Zinn's like A People's History of the United States. Have you read that book?
I have not.
Okay, so that was my American history book.
Okay.
And it's not good. Like it's historically somewhat inaccurate in certain places. It's very opinionated. It's very propagandized, if I were to make an argument for it. But go ahead.
I was just curious what generation you're coming in on, because I'm squarely Gen X.
Oh yeah, so I'm a geriatric millennial is apparently like what my formal name is.
Okay.
Like I'm the Zennial. So I'm in that the
You're
last
halfway between
group of,
me and the okay.
Like I'm like latchkey kid, 90s kid. So I was born in 83, but so technically I'm right in that last year or two on the cusp of being a millennial,
right.
which
I graduated high school in the late 80s, so very much John Hughes kind of culture,
right?
All those movies. So I'm not familiar with your textbook. I want to say our textbooks were probably a little bit sanitized, particularly with like Native American history and stuff like that, which is pretty typical. Coming out of the 70s, I had a couple of interesting viewpoints. My mother was a public school teacher for probably 7 years in the Oklahoma City area. And when she was teaching in the early 60s, she tells me the story about one of her superintendents saying, boy, just wait till the federal government starts funding this and it's going to go downhill. So this is before. Now, people usually will say, get rid of the Department of Education. But what they don't realize is when Carter, or whenever it was, created the Department of Education, it was basically consolidating functions out of other agencies. So it's not like they just suddenly started meddling in education in 1974. I mean, my dates are probably wrong. So it's kind of like the Department of Homeland Security was just an amalgam of a bunch of other offices, departments, and whatnot. So I caution people, we can eliminate the Department of Education, and then those functions will go crawling right back to where they were. Now they'll be a little less visible and maybe a little less influential, but you've got to burn it out at the root if you're going to really make headway. And so my mom would say, suddenly all these requirements come in, right? Because when you take the king's shilling, you have to obey the rules, right? So that really started in the 60s, probably several years before the DOE rears its ugly head. And it has. If you look at the average test scores and per pupil spending and all this business, the average test scores go flat. The per pupil spending adjusted for inflation and all that, on the graphic goes, and then the test scores are flat. So congratulations, I guess.
Right.
But back to, I think what you were talking about is your history book was crap, right?
Yeah.
I think we have a lot more access to better text, but it's really kind of hard, like you said, to find something that's not, agendaized.
Right.
Like America's horrible or America's awesome. Right? I'm like, okay, just tell me what happened.
Right.
And then let's talk about it. So, I mean, what's the answer? I think, number one, get rid of the Department of Education, ironically, and then just basically pass a bill that says we're done. We're not sending money. The states shall no longer send money and just keep their own. And let's start working it back, ratcheting it back the other way.
Right.
The public school model it was outdated when it was invented, probably, right? This idea that we stratify kids by age, which doesn't make any sense because at home, the siblings are probably not all the same age unless your mom had quadruplets or whatever, right? So
Right.
I'm coming off of several years now. My wife, right before we got married, I'm remarried, right? She decided to pull her kids out of the local district, and the local school district where we are is a boutique, right? It's
Right.
K through 8 only, and then they funnel into your choice of one of two really nice public school systems, well funded and the whole deal. But it was just you couldn't make any headway if the superintendent disagreed. That was it. The superintendent basically picked the school board as opposed to the other way around. It was like, oh, if Mr. Super doesn't like this person, we probably shouldn't vote for him. And you ended up with a guy who was superintendent for almost 30 years. So she's like, we're done. Pulled her kids out, and it's been an adventure, a really kind of a fun and horrifying adventure in equal measure. But my oldest stepdaughter just left for college, and her ACTs were fine, well above average. Her credits were fine, well above average. Their GPA was well above average. The funny thing is when you have to order a diploma, and you kind of feel like you're trying to get away with something, but then you realize, hold on, the state diplomas are fake.
Yeah.
At least as fake as this one. So
right. That's funny.
So it ends up being fine. And so if there are people out there who are worried about, homeschooling.
Well, I think there's a lot of people right
shot.
now, and I don't know that this was the direction that I intended to take, but I'm in a huge fight right now with our local school board. So I have been speaking at meetings and all of that stuff. I'm on week 2 of my COVID recovery, and I have huge issues with the masking of children. Mm-hmm. And so I've been going and fighting at these school board meetings, and it's the same situation. And what happened at our last meeting, the board actually relinquished all authority dealing with COVID to the superintendent. So the board's not even going to take a vote anymore on anything regarding COVID. The superintendent gets to unilaterally decide for the entire school system.
That's pretty weak sauce.
Yeah.
They're just so now everyone's going to yell at the super and then go to the school board meeting and demand they fire the super.
What, or say, oh, well, we're going to vote you out. Well, it's not my fault that we shut the schools down. It's not my fault it's the superintendent's fault, but you choose the superintendent. Like it's
school board elections, by the way, are vicious.
Yes, they are. They're incredibly brutal.
One of the reasons that was one of the other reasons we pulled out was school board fights were just ridiculous around here. And
well, it's just it's not supposed to be about politics at this point, right? Like we should be actually making decisions about what's best for the kids. That's your job. Your job is to advocate for children, not some fucking union. Not some. And when you have 67% of the teachers also say that they do not want the children masked, I mean, you probably need to start listening to the parents and the teachers.
Maybe.
Yeah. So,
you think?
yeah. But talking about homeschooling, So I want to ask you a little bit about that since you do have experience with it. Do your kids appreciate the fact that they were homeschooled? Like, are they glad that that's how their education ended up?
So every time they've been threatened with public school as a result of poor choices or whatever, it's pointed out that you would have to get up at 6 a.m. and be on a bus.
Right.
And that's the most terrifying part for them. Is that they really, really enjoy their flexible schedule. They can get up because if you have teenagers, and now I have my own and married into 3 more. So it's sort of a little Brady Bunch kind of deal, but they're all teenagers now. Like I said, one just took off for college. She just turned 18 and bailed on us. But the rest are middle teens, and they don't get up at 6 naturally. It isn't a thing.
Right.
Follow the science. So, and I work early, so it gets to be interesting when, they want to be up till 11, 12 every night because they didn't get up till 9 or, whatever it is.
Sure.
Wander out of, but they really, really, I think, mostly appreciate being able to do school in PJs at 10 in the morning.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand about this is when you line up your own curriculum, and this doesn't mean you're self-teaching. Homeschooling isn't self-teaching. It's what I think a lot of people assume, that like moms are at the kitchen table reading from a primer or something, and that's not what it is. What their mother has mostly done is she's a curriculum director. She gets each kid their curriculum sorted out. It might be at a local co-op. It might be an online class with a small tuition. It might be across town at a certified teacher who dropped out of the system and now teaches kids out of her house. We've done that before. So they're able to get that stuff in and out. And it takes as long as they want it to take. It doesn't take 7th hour. They don't have to be there sitting around, waiting for class to end or running down a hallway and, dealing with horrible public school kids who shove them into lockers or whatever it is.
Sure.
But I think if you held their feet to the fire, they'd say, yeah, we kind of think it's cool to do school in PJs on the couch with a laptop.
Right. And what about like social engagement? Like, how do they get that by being homeschooled?
So here's the secret. They have friends. Our kids have friends from co-op. Our kids have friends from, like, say, a jiu-jitsu class or fencing or whatever the heck they're doing as an extracurricular, or homeschool band.
Right.
Yes, Oklahoma has a huge homeschool band program. A private organization that has like over 1,000 kids in it, I think.
Wow.
And they have chapters all over the state. It's pretty cool. We're in the metro, so one of the boys, the teen boys, has a strings teacher who's in the Philharmonic at Oklahoma City, who comes to our house. And he has homeschool band, and it's all this stuff. You're just like, the lid comes off. There's no limit to what you can't do, and it doesn't cost a fortune unless you really want it to. In fact, you're way more likely to spend your way into poverty at a Tony private school,
right,
than doing it this way. So they have friends from all these different activities. Like I said, co-ops, extracurricular stuff. And let's be honest, kids today, they're all in their phones anyway.
Right, sure.
So at least we know who their friends are. And they all just went to the local ice rink the other day with their underdeveloped asocial friend group, It reminds me of the apocryphal story of the mom. 2 moms meet at the park, and one mom's homeschooled, and the other mom says, well, how do your kids get any social engagement? And the one mom looks at the other and is like pointing at the playground.
Like, you're here with my kids right now.
You're here with my kids right now. And that goes back to the whole social engagement in the public school is artificially stratified and doesn't actually help them develop.
Right.
If everybody in your peer group is the exact same age, that isn't challenging to a lot of kids.
Sure.
So there's a lot of studies that talk about when you have kids that are in different ages, and like in a homeschool environment, particularly the youngest are at a huge advantage because they can piggyback
Pick up
off of
on
what
stuff, yeah.
big brother and big sister did. So, the youngest is actually blasting through her math at stupid rates. So
That's cool. Okay,
anyway,
so let's go ahead and move
guns,
into party stuff.
immigration.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm a party guy.
you're part of the OKLP. So I have to be honest with you, and I'm going to be really transparent with you. I almost canceled our episode tonight.
Uh-oh.
Because you guys had a pretty salty start to your year, with Kevin having to step down as your chair.
Right.
And I'm very good friends with Ashley.
Okay.
So I felt a moral conflict of interest there because I didn't appreciate how that was handled, not necessarily from a party perspective, but a lot of the people surrounding it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like a lot of us know Kevin, and I mean, he was the chair.
Right.
He's very active and all that. And I don't know how to put this other than he kind of withdrew from social media for his own reasons,
Right.
which aren't necessarily all about his previous relationships. And basically asked everybody, look, don't feel like you have to comment on this.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of all like, oh, okay. If he wants to talk about it, I guess he'll talk about it. But, we're kind of like, he stepped down. The drama end of that, I think, is pretty much Twitter. There are people who are going back and forth. All I can say is maybe there's perspectives that people on Twitter don't have.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to comment on it either way. And I've actually,
no. And
Kevin pretty much said, hey, everybody just let it go.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Do you regret how it was handled from a party perspective? Do you think that you guys should have publicly come out and denounced the behavior?
Well, I guess if you're going to put me on the spot, I have, and this is going to sound like a lawyer, a public defender, but what behavior?
Well,
are
the
we
fact
talking
that he
about?
admitted
Because
to it and still was propped as the chair, right? Like he publicly admitted that he abused her.
And I think I know which tweets you're talking about. And this is going to sound horrible, but I don't think a lot of people understand the context. And I'm not here to attack or defend or any of that. I just think what I witnessed on Twitter was a lot of people connecting dots that weren't necessarily,
right,
maybe accurate. I mean, I don't know. I'm not here to call anyone out.
No, I know. And
basically, the party, as far as I know, and I'm not on the executive committee, but they accepted his resignation and it was pretty quick. So it wasn't like we had all these weeks and weeks and months of, sheltering somebody or any of that stuff. So
sure. The reason that I bring it up is to let you know that was an internal issue that I was having personally because Ashley is a friend of mine. And I reached out to her first to ask her if she was still okay if we had this episode, because it's important to me that for my friendship and my integrity that I don't give voice or a platform to somebody who may have contributed to additional damage that she incurred. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see that. I just
also like lead into this conversation about the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus, right? Like there is a lot of opportunity for both of those platforms, although they do not completely coincide with one another. There is an opportunity for real growth and change politically right now. There are a lot of disenfranchised voters who are looking for places to go, and I can't help from the outside looking down or in, right? Objectively, I can't help but feel like there's a lot of waste right now within both of those organizations, where we're busy talking about who's fat on Twitter versus actually like going against the state, which we all should be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let's differentiate between Liberty Twitter and basically everything else.
Sure, let's do that.
There is drama on Twitter that has spilled over from real world events.
Case in point.
Like, or just take somebody completely neutral to this conversation. Like, there are a group of people who hate every atom in Josh Smith's body and actively go at him like all the time. And
right.
I'm friendly with Josh.
Yeah, I am too.
I met Josh. We hung out at Orlando, and I'm like, yeah, he's a nice enough guy. And it doesn't matter how many receipts he provides as to what the reality of his situation is. There is a group of people that I called Liberty Mean Girls who did some pretty shady crap.
Yeah.
And these are party people. These are party people. And I'm like, Josh, there's a thing in law that I Googled, because I can Google, called, what was it? Tortious interference in a custodial relationship.
Yeah. Talking
specifically about his daughter and his custody and people trying to get in the middle of that. And I'm like, that's actionable in a lot of states, and they need to knock it off. And I don't understand it. So in the party, yes, there are mean girls, just like there are in every other organization.
There are mean guys too.
And mean girls is a collective, right?
Okay.
Just the idea that there's a group of people that seem to be more interested in maintaining their social credit rating, whatever it's worth. If it means making sure somebody else isn't getting more, that's fine.
Right.
And I call it the big fish, little pond effect. They don't want a big pond. They want to be the big fish forever. And, in reality, they're small fish, right? They're minnows. But the pond is small because we're libertarians. There's only a few of us. And it's completely a waste of time for what they're doing. But I would say, on the other hand, if you go back to the whole Orlando thing, last spring 2020, May 2020 was when they scheduled the convention, and they had to cancel it because the hotel in Austin, Texas said we can't, or, they invoked a cancellation force majeure clause or whatever, because they couldn't guarantee what the contract said or whatever. And I wasn't in on that.
Right.
But the national committee had to cancel that. So they had to come up with a way for us to get our presidential nominee going and all this stuff. And so there's all this talk about, we'll do the convention online. The bylaws don't allow it, but we have no choice, and it goes back and forth.
Right.
The short version of the story is probably only a fourth of the voting delegates voted for an all online convention, which would clearly have violated the bylaws.
Right.
3/4 of the people were like, no, we only agreed to this online thing if there would be a in-person convention as stipulated, legal, the whole deal. So that made me feel a little better that there's a silent majority kind of thing going, where there's the people, the Twitter and the Facebook drama people who are, the Sarwarks and the anti-Sarwarks to a degree, going back and forth all the time.
Right.
But, and I know that's off-putting as hell for a lot of new people. And it is the reason that the Mises guys are recruiting so highly, because there's a lot of disaffected Republicans.
I'm one of them. I was a Republican.
I will tell you a story, and this is gonna. I hope this irritates all the right people. I had seen all this, well, the libertarians, were anarchists, or the libertarians were this, or the libertarians were that. And I'm like, hold up. I asked the old man, Frank, who founded our state party, Frank Robinson. He's kind of a legend. He was he's probably the last living co-founder of the original National Party. And I asked him, Frank, it's my impression that the Libertarian Party started as a bunch of pissed off Goldwater Republicans. He's like, yeah, we were sick of Nixon. So I see you got a bug.
I do. It's driving me insane. If I can catch it or kill it, like I keep, and it keeps coming to my face.
I will not say anything if you have a giant attack there.
Like an outburst in a minute. I don't know where it went, but it's driving me nuts.
Oh, it's right behind you. No, so basically, Frank, he let it all out. He says, yeah, we were all irritated by Nixon and started this party. He says, I was further radicalized. So he's way more radical, half anarchist now. But I say this to point out that the Libertarian Party is at its heart and essence a minarchist institution.
Right.
If you were really, really, really anarchist, you would probably not be. I mean, the ANCAP people who are pragmatic are in the party, and they should be there. They should be in the party. In fact, my spectrum of libertarian legitimacy, if I were the king of all things, would be...
Okay, hold on.
Are you going to get him? Clap your hands.
Oh, it's driving me nuts. I'm totally going to have to edit this out.
It's okay. It's fine.
I can't find it. Okay, keep going.
For me, the spectrum kind of runs from classical liberalism of the founders through, like a minarchist phase and off into the ANCAP world. The party is essentially a minarchist capitalist party. And that's just how it was. And I think that's still how it mostly is. There are a lot of principled left libertarian types. I think there's a lot of reconciliation that some like libsoc types need to do with the party platform. Because I think throwing out or rejecting half of it probably means this isn't a good fit. I'm not going to kick anybody out. Right. I'm saying we're a big tent, and there's a lot of people that won't come in the tent.
Yeah.
But they say they're in the tent, but you're not in the tent.
Yeah.
I'll probably catch some hell for this, but where were we talking? I got a little confused by the moth, so.
I'm sorry.
So what was the question?
Fly. No.
God, those are the worst.
I'm trying to... It wasn't really a question. It's just like a generalization. Like I feel like they're missing an opportunity. Like I feel like I don't really. I was a conservative Republican until I'd say March of 2020 when you started telling me that I had to give up my fucking civil liberties because you're worried about a virus, right? So like the radicalization that has taken place for me personally over the course of the last year is vast. Like the difference in how I feel towards politics, the government, this country in general has shifted a complete 180. And the opportunity for me to be brought into... You've got to be kidding me right now. It's driving me... And it keeps going after my lipstick. The opportunity that I could have been brought into the Libertarian Party or the Mises Caucus would have been much greater had I felt like people were actually trying to bring me in or not. I don't even like to say bring me in because I don't do the collectivism thing, right? Like I don't need to believe all the same things that you believe or act the way that you do, but to at least give me like common ground with you to want to have like a conversation or something, right? And now I just look at all of the people who have the biggest voices in those platforms, and I'm like, you're just an edgelord. Like, you just want to be cool. You want people to like. I
could
think it's
do
a
with
missed
about
opportunity.
95% less edgy in
Yeah.
the liberty movement. I I appreciate a good comedy act or whatever, and I understand sometimes there's a time and a place for edgy humor, polemic kind of diatribes and whatnot. But, it's like the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for this.
Right.
It's not all the time.
Yeah.
If somebody like AOC comes out and says something completely off the wall, bonkers, stupid, by all means,
Right.
flood tubes 2 and 4 and engage, right? And
Sure.
just sink that thing. But when you've got, and to be honest, people on Twitter, it's kind of hard not, I can understand it's kind of hard not to react kind of snarkily when you have some edgelord leftist ANCOM whatever, griping about something from their iPhone, and you're like, hello?
Right. Yeah.
Talking about a living wage.
Yeah.
You have $1,000 phone and you're complaining about a living wage. You're a ridiculous person.
Yes.
They probably are ridiculous people. They're probably also 19 years old and
Sure.
don't know anything.
Yeah.
And that's one of the advantages of being in Gen X today is we know all kinds of things now instead of not knowing anything. I'm teasing.
Right. No, I got you.
It is frustrating, and I know there's a lot of Mises, oriented people who take a lot of heat for being what we call polemic. I think if we tempered that with a lot more, nice outreach, like, look, man, if somebody's willing to at least talk, we should totally just talk. But I understand there's a target-rich environment on some place like Twitter.
Right.
But on the flip side, like all of the new people who came into the OKLP came in from Mises, and there's all this talk about the takeover, and I'm like, yeah, okay, they came in, they elected a lot of people to the board, and then they all, to a person, said, how can we help the state party? And so at the end of the day, I just want to say, kids, I don't care if you hate the National Party or you think, quote, LP National is off track. I don't know what people think LP National is, because it's a nonsense term. LP National is a Twitter account.
Right.
The LP is made up of thousands of people. The LNC is made up of, a dozen or so who were elected. And that amount of drama is kind of irrelevant. They do things at the national level, but if you don't want to deal with that, if you don't want to put up with that, I don't care. Go join your state party and volunteer and get a city councilman elected. Go wave a sign,
right.
or door hang, door knocker kind of activities. My wife and I have done that several times. We have two of which were on city council campaigns that were victorious.
That's kind of
one
exciting.
Of which our former state chair won by 2 votes in Choctaw, Oklahoma, which is not the biggest town in the world, but it's not small.
Right. That's exciting.
He won by 2. Now, I think those 2 votes, I mean, that's critical, having, your kids jumping up and down, waving a sign, and your wife knocking on doors while you tick people off of the list and navigate around a town you don't know.
Sure.
We've been doing that kind of volunteering. Do that. I mean, ignore the National Party. You don't have to have anything to do with them.
Right.
If you are actually serious about effecting political change in your area, please consider your local county affiliate or state affiliate or both. Don't join national. I don't care.
Yeah.
If you want to play in the show and do all that, whatever you call it, that's great. But I will say, the national people, it's a small pond. You go to a convention and you'll meet all these super famous libertarian people and find out that they work at a hardware store.
Right.
I mean, Spike Cohen is obviously a secret billionaire overlord. and that's how he travels the country. He came to our convention. We hung out with him. I told him to go to Brahms and eat ice cream. So, but like I said, Orlando was our first convention. What did we end up doing? My wife ended up coming in and substituting for a bunch of tellers left early on Sunday because they didn't think that they thought the convention was scheduled to end at like 4 p.m. And so they all had flights out. I'm like, who does this? So my wife, who's the state secretary, volunteered to go help. So at the end of convention, we end up in Karen Ann Harlow's suite with her husband, Wayne, while Josh is lounging on a couch. I mean, people from every, group are in this thing, while Twitter and Facebook are going insane, saying the vote is being rigged. And I'm like, the vote's being rigged by who? Karen Ann's right there next to Joe Henchman, who won the chair, and they were tallying up stuff. I'm like, these people are all people. I mean, if the fanciest people you've got are, attorneys with a regular practice in a town somewhere, I mean, it's not Dr. Jorgensen. She's a professor.
Yeah.
This party isn't about, even at the national level, is not a bunch of super famous, wealthy elites. The most elite you get, like I said, is the evil billionaire overlord Spike Cohen, who roams around, spreading his nanites or whatever he does.
Sure.
To bring people to liberty, which I fully support Spike as overlord. So that's fine.
Do you think that...
I'm rambling again. I told you about that.
No, you're fine. I've gotten the impression that the Mises Caucus has really moved toward, like, these ANCAPs have really moved towards being, like, just not participating in the system anymore. Like, they're not voting anymore. Right. They don't care about the elections and things like that. So
I know there are a strain of ANCAP that don't vote.
Right.
I tend to ascribe that more to the agorist subculture of anarchy, who are like, voting is immoral. Spooner. By the way, Spooner, have you read Spooner? That kind of thing. Kind of like how the Mises people are all Rothbard. Have you read Rothbard? I'm like, okay, everyone, I understand who Rothbard is. Everybody has their favorite,
right.
economic philosopher or whatever. But I'm like, this is the Libertarian Party. This is a political party. This political party is part of this system. I know we don't like the system. We're playing the game on the field with the rules that we have because the alternative is bloody, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Someday in the future, will there be another glorious revolution? I hope it doesn't come to that. I'd rather fix these issues, or at least wake people up to where they're not just voting and checking a box.
Like
I'll tell you what you can do. States are the solution, right, to federal overreach, and they always were. States ultimately just forgot that they actually run the show.
Sure.
The federal government can do what they want, but I have this crazy, like, I want to write a short story fantasy about some state like Montana, somebody crazy enough to tell the feds, no, we're not going to make the tobacco age 21. And then the feds come back and go, well, we won't send you your highway money. And that state's saying, okay,
yeah,
we're not collecting it at the pump anymore.
You're right.
Texas could get away with that.
Texas
they could say,
if there's anybody that's going to do it, I feel like Texas is getting really close to it.
I mean, Montana, I want to say about 10 years ago, Montana made a little bit of a move towards, we're not participating in these monkey shines anymore. But
so what are your thoughts on balkanization then? Like, what do you think about a national divorce?
I think the country started as a union of states. I think if we went to our original constitutional model as originally publicly understood by the people who signed off on it, I know sorry, ANCAP, agorists, and Spoonerites who are like, the Constitution is powerless to prevent this. I'm like, yeah, well, the rules of Major League Baseball are powerless to prevent a spitball then, right? It's against the rules if you don't enforce the rules, whatever. Okay.
Right.
I understand that's not what Spooner was really on about. There was a lot more nuance to it, but balkanization is not. Balkanization was the design. I mean, we shouldn't be giant chunks of the country. Texas should have their own rules if they want. Oklahoma has their own rules. That becomes not really a thing. If, like I said, if the states would just rediscover the dual sovereignty model and say, hey, we don't owe you a thing. I mean, maybe it takes an Article 5 convention. Maybe I don't know. That's pretty dramatic, but I will tell you this. Here's why I'm a little more sanguine than a lot of people about the direction the country's headed. I don't think it's hopeless, and here's why. If you look at gun rights since say the 90s. In the early 90s, there was no concealed carry anywhere, really, except for maybe Arizona had open carry because they never prohibited it. Good for them. So it was Florida. Then they got called the gunshine state. And it was horrible. And there were going to be people shooting each other over a Walmart parking space.
Right.
Which never happened. You now have what? Almost every state has a concealed carry issuance regime. The new phase is constitutional / open / unrestricted carry, which Oklahoma just did. And Texas is maybe just did. Oklahoma did it like a year ago. So if you look at that, states just kind of unregulating it. When enough states do that, it puts a huge amount of pressure on Congress, which brings me to my second thing, the opposite of gun rights, weed, right? I'm looking at the camera. I don't smoke weed. I never have. I'm probably never going to do it. Not just because of my job or any of that, whatever. On the other hand, I don't care what people do in their own house. That's the essence of liberty, right? I don't care if you get wacky with the grass, the wacky grass, whatever it is.
You're bordering on boomer talk right now.
No.
Like
I do that on purpose.
Out of Zennial.
Trust me.
And Gen X.
I do that. Well, think about this, though. The boomers were all high as a kite when they were in college.
My mom was such a pothead. Like, she would tell me stories about being, like, lit and passed out. And I'm like, God.
Mom. Well, what I was going to say was look at the state initiatives and state questions that have been popping up all over the place. You now have a supermajority of states that have somehow decrimmed, legalized, medicalized, whatever, to some degree, marijuana, to the point where at some point in the very near future, in the next 2 years, probably 2 to 5 years, I'd say, the federal government is going to be forced to deschedule it. Because
it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of
state has no law and the feds are like, nope, still illegal. Eventually those state legislatures and people that represent those states are going to be like, hey,
a lot of people don't remember this, but right before Donald Trump left office, the House of Representatives has already passed a bill that states that marijuana is decriminalized.
So this is what I think is interesting. They never sent it
to the Senate.
No. So the Congress is still wrapped up in a bunch of drug warriors. What I think is really weird is, if I'm not mistaken, the director of the DEA or the president or the attorney general, one of these people can, by executive action, reschedule but not deschedule a drug. They have that flexibility. Yet,
they still don't do it.
You know where I'm going with this? President Chumgang Obama couldn't be bothered to take it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2.
Right.
Even Schedule 2.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to put something on a schedule, marijuana probably ought to be on 3 or 4 or off altogether.
Right.
But I'm saying you could have rescheduled that. Any one of these presidents who was like, yeah, we probably shouldn't be throwing everyone in jail for weed. Here's me not doing anything about it.
Right.
And letting the, drug war continue and locking up a bunch of poor people and minorities. If you administered truth serum to the last 3 or 4 presidents, they'd be like, I hate women and minorities. Oh, people disproportionately affected by these victimless crimes, I just think it's disgusting that, Bush admitted to it. Clinton, oh my God, Clinton, you knew he was lit in college, if not in the Oval Office. I mean, you've got Bush. They all admitted, oh, well, I tried it that one time. President Obama admitted to smoking profusely through college. And not one of these people, and Trump's tried it, right? Everybody's done it. I don't know about Biden. Oddly, I don't think Biden
actually, I don't think that Donald Trump has. He is very big on, not that this matters or is relevant, but his thing was always like, his kids didn't, and he doesn't ever like partake in vices. So that's why he never, like when he would go to all of these events and stuff, he would always drink like Diet Coke or water. Like he wouldn't drink alcohol. He doesn't do anything that could potentially like bring him down.
Oh, right. Because he might get attacked.
I'm just
at
saying,
any time.
Like that's one of the things that
his vices. About. That does make a weird kind of sense. His vices are all, sex related, right?
Right.
Okay.
He just grabs women by the pussy. He doesn't drink alcohol or smoke weed.
But God put him there. Yeah. In the same sense that God put Hitler in power or any of these other things. Look, I'm a Presbyterian and I believe in the sovereignty of the Almighty and that he sets up and tears down kings. Okay, let's be clear. Right. That doesn't mean it's an approval of this people's
behavior.
Don't even get me started on the evangelical love affair with Donald Trump. Makes no sense to me at all. So there you go.
That's funny.
No, but it's just like I said, it's just disgusting that all these presidents talk about it, and like every single one of them could have literally said, "Hey, DEA guy, whatever your name is, put weed on Schedule 2, stat." But it would lose them too much money, right?
Yeah.
So it would put downward pressure on asset forfeiture and all this other crap that we're trying to get rid of at state and local levels, which is back to the whole, I think states can fix a lot of these problems by eliminating a lot of these programs and refusing to cooperate with the federal programs.
Right.
Like asset forfeiture, these kind of things. So we've seen a lot less people in jail for marijuana because of state questions and local action. So it's still possible. We have some pretty good examples of how it's possible that freedom got increased, not only by the people, but by voting for freedom.
Wink, wink, nudge,
wink,
nudge.
Wink, agorist man. I know it's not the same as choosing another master, but it's the system. We choose to work within the system. So as a libertarian, as a party person, as a pragmatist in action, but not Prag Caucus. And they're not even a thing anymore. I don't think.
Really?
I think they went away after the last chair resigned. Anyway, I think we're doing what we can, and like we've seen gains. We've seen increase in voter registration in our party. We've seen people starting to get elected where we hadn't the last 10 years ago. There were 0. Right. Now there's 5. We have 5 city council, maybe more. I mean, a couple of them, yes, they switched while in office, and yes, they're nonpartisan. But at some point, we're going to crack that nut of like a state legislator, a partisan race, or a partisan mayor's race somewhere. It's coming. So
I think
keep rowing the boat, people.
I don't know. I think Thomas Massey is probably the only person. Rand Paul maybe sometimes, not very often. Do what?
Yeah, I think Rand Paul, about half the time he's like spot on, and the other
Right.
half you're like, bro.
What Republican grabbed a hold of you on your way in?
Cop gave you a bag of money that you had to say that. Get it.
But I don't know. Like, I'd like to see some gains made for the party of liberty. Like, I don't care, agorist, anarchist.
Right.
I don't care. I just want more freedom-minded individuals to be in a position to affect change. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out over the course of the next, 5 to 10 years.
I do too. I'm hopeful. Our state party has grown like by leaps and bounds the past 2 or 3 cycles. So, national will come and go but as more states grow, that puts that upward pressure on the national membership. So,
right.
At some point, potentially if there is such a thing, a principled Republican or Democrat candidate will agree to a debate. Maybe.
Yeah.
But I don't know. We all know the Commission on Presidential Debates is a sham. So
yeah, that's super frustrating.
You can't be in the debate unless you poll at this level on these 5 polls.
But our polls are all
poll
wrong.
Us? Well,
right.
The polls they didn't include Joe Jorgensen on the poll, so they ensure that they won't get the percentage by just ignoring him. So
it's crazy. All right, sir. I am going to end this. Tell everybody where they can find your stuff, where they can find your...
Okay, so I believe I'm on Facebook as Armed Bear Caucus,
okay.
at Armed Bears on Facebook. www.armedbears.org is primarily an offsite mirror for the Facebook posts and stuff in case, I get zucked.
Sure.
And then on Twitter at Armed Bear Caucus. Or my lovely wife at Mrs. LABC. She's the other member of the caucus, the lovely state secretary of the OKLP.
Awesome.
Other than that, I appreciate the time.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for coming on with me. It was good. Maybe we can do another one as we get closer to election time and stuff like that. Be happy to.
I just thought you might want somebody who would get on here who wasn't just going to make fun of other people.
Yeah, it's
like
important.
All those edgelords.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to be notified whenever we have another episode come up, please subscribe. We are available on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen. Please make it a great day in America. This is the country where few people leave, too many people want to enter, and dead people still vote. Take care.